I never believed the dead truly spoke to me until the night Adrian Harcourt vanished from my parlor, leaving only the scent of lavender and a cold so profound it burned my lungs. Before that terrible evening, I had convinced myself that my gift was merely intuition, a widow's loneliness dressed in spiritual garments, a means to survive in a city that had little patience for women without husbands or fortunes. The autumn of 1888 found me in Bloomsbury, in a narrow townhouse with peeling wallpaper and a persistent draft that no amount of coal could banish. My sitting room had become a shrine to grief and commerce both. The round table draped in burgundy velvet, candles positioned at cardinal points, the air perpetually thick with incense meant to mask the smell of damp and desperation. I had been widowed 3 years by then, my dear Thomas taken by consumption before we had celebrated our 2nd anniversary. And I had discovered in the wake of his death that I possessed either a genuine connection to the spirit world or a talent for reading the living so acute it might as well have been supernatural. The distinction hardly mattered. The bereaved paid the same either way. My clients were mostly women, widows like myself, or mothers who had lost children to scarlet fever or cholera. Their grief so palpable, I could taste it like copper on my tongue. They came with faded photographs clutched in gloved hands, with lockets containing locks of hair, with questions that broke my heart even as I answered them with carefully vague reassurances from beyond. I told myself I was offering comfort, that the small deceits I practiced were acts of mercy in a world already too cruel. I told myself this even as I lay awake at night, listening to the sound of carriages on rain-slicked streets, wondering if Thomas would forgive me for using his memory this way. Then Adrian Harcourt arrived, and everything I thought I understood about my gift, about myself, about the boundary between this world and the next, began to unravel like silk thread pulled from a spool. He came on a Thursday evening in late October, announced by Mrs. Hewitt, my landlady, who was also my only servant and the closest thing I had to a friend. She knocked twice on the parlor door, her face pinched with the particular expression she reserved for clients who looked as though they might actually be able to pay. "A gentleman to see you, Mrs. Ashford," she said, and there was warning in her voice, a note of caution that made me smooth my morning dress and check that my hair was properly pinned beneath my widow's cap. He was tall, this gentleman, taller than Thomas had been, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and an air of command that suggested he was accustomed to spaces much grander than my modest parlor. His coat was expertly tailored, his cravat tied with precision, and his gloves were the soft gray of morning fog. But it was his face that arrested me, the sharp planes of it, the dark eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they touched, the mouth set in a line that spoke of grief held so tightly it had calcified into something harder and more enduring. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, his voice low and carefully controlled, "I am Lord Adrian Harcourt. I have come regarding a matter of some delicacy." I gestured to the chair across from mine, the one I kept for clients, its cushion worn but clean. "Please, sit, my lord. I am at your service." He hesitated, just for a moment, and I saw something flicker across his features, skepticism perhaps, or distaste. Men rarely came to me, and when they did, they came with their doubt worn like armor, daring me to prove myself against the fortress of their rationality. I had learned to expect it, even to find it tedious, this need they had to establish their superiority even as they sought comfort from the very forces they claimed to disbelieve. But Adrian Harcourt sat, removing his gloves with slow deliberation, laying them across his knee with a care that seemed almost ritual. His hands were elegant, long-fingered, the hands of a pianist or a surgeon, and I found myself wondering what they might feel like against my skin before banishing the thought with a flush of shame. I was a widow. I was a professional. I had no business entertaining such notions about a client, especially one who regarded me with such cool assessment. "I am told you are able to contact the deceased," he said, and his tone suggested he found the very idea absurd. "I facilitate communication with those who have passed beyond the veil," I replied. using the language I had learned to employ, formal enough to sound legitimate without making promises I could not keep. I cannot guarantee success, but I have been blessed with a sensitivity to the spirit world that allows me on occasion to serve as a conduit. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My sister, Lady Catherine Harcourt, died 6 months ago. She was 22 years old. I wish to know if she is at peace. There was something in the way he said it, a fracture in that controlled voice that made my heart contract. This was not the curiosity of a skeptic seeking to debunk a fraud. This was grief, raw and unhealed, dressed in the clothing of rational inquiry, because that was the only way a man like Adrian Harcourt could allow himself to acknowledge it. "I am sorry for your loss," I said, and I meant it. The death of one so young is a tragedy beyond measure. May I ask the circumstances? He looked away then, toward the window where rain had begun to spatter against the glass. "An accident," he said flatly. "She fell from her horse during a hunt. Her neck was broken instantly. They tell me she did not suffer. But he suffered. I could see it in every rigid line of his body, in the way his hands gripped the arms of the chair as though he might otherwise fly apart. I had seen enough grief to recognize its many disguises, and Adrian Harcourt wore his like a second skin, so familiar he perhaps no longer even noticed its weight. "I will do everything in my power to reach her," I said quietly, "but I must ask you to come with an open heart. The spirits are drawn to love, to the bonds that transcend death. Skepticism creates barriers that even the strongest connections cannot penetrate." He turned back to me, and for the first time, our eyes truly met. His were brown, so dark they were nearly black, and in them I saw something that made my breath catch, a loneliness so profound it echoed my own. In that moment, I understood that Adrian Harcourt was not merely grieving his sister. He was a man adrift, severed from joy, from hope, from any sense of purpose beyond the dutiful management of his title and estates. He was as much a ghost as any spirit I had ever claimed to contact. "I will try," he said, and it sounded like a confession. Over the following weeks, Adrian came to me 3 times each week, always in the evening, always dressed in the same somber elegance. We held séances in my parlor, the candles flickering between us, the darkness pressing close, and I spoke the words I had spoken 100 times before, calling out to Lady Catherine, inviting her to make her presence known. Sometimes the table would shudder, or a candle would gutter and die, and I would relay messages in the dreamy voice I had perfected, vague assurances about peace and light and love continuing beyond death. But something was different with Adrian. I felt it from the first session, a charge in the air between us, a connection that had nothing to do with spirits and everything to do with the living, breathing man across from me. When his hand accidentally brushed mine as we arranged ourselves at the table, I felt heat bloom through my entire body. When he spoke his sister's name, his voice breaking just slightly, I wanted to reach across the space between us and offer comfort that had nothing to do with my supposed gifts. I told myself it was inappropriate, that I was betraying Thomas's memory, that Adrian was a lord and I was a widowed medium of questionable respectability, that the gulf between our stations was insurmountable. I told myself all of this, and yet I found myself taking greater care with my appearance on the evenings he was expected, pinning my hair more carefully, choosing the morning dress that, while still properly somber, fit me in a way that reminded me I was still young, still a woman, still capable of wanting things I had no right to want. Adrian, too, began to change. His skepticism softened, replaced by something more complex, a willingness to suspend disbelief that seemed born less from conviction about the spiritual world and more from a desire to prolong our time together. He began arriving earlier, staying later, asking questions about my life, about Thomas, about how I had discovered my abilities. We spoke of his childhood with Catherine, of the games they had played in the gardens of his family's estate, of her laughter and her kindness, and the way her death had carved a hole in the world that nothing could fill. And gradually, so gradually, I almost did not notice it happening. Our sessions became less about contacting Catherine and more about the two of us, sitting in candlelight, speaking truths we could not speak anywhere else. He told me about the loneliness of his position, the weight of expectations, the way grief had made him question everything he had once believed about duty and meaning. I told him about my own loneliness, about the guilt I carried for using my gift this way, about the nights I lay awake wondering if I was a fraud or if there truly was something beyond this world reaching out to me. "You are not a fraud," he said one evening, his voice fierce with conviction. "Whatever you are, Eleanor, whoever you are, you have given me something I thought lost forever. You have given me hope." He had begun calling me Eleanor somewhere along the way, abandoning the formal Mrs. Ashford, and I had not corrected him. In truth, I cherished the sound of my name in his mouth, the intimacy of it, the way it suggested we were something more than medium and client, something closer to equals. On the night everything changed, the night Adrian vanished, November had arrived with its particular cruelty, the cold seeping through every crack in the house, the darkness falling so early, it felt as though the sun had given up entirely. Adrian arrived just after 7, shaking rain from his coat, his hair damp and curling slightly at his collar. He looked exhausted, shadows beneath his eyes, his face drawn in a way that worried me. "Are you well?" I asked, taking his coat, my fingers brushing his in a way that made my heart race. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I am weary, Eleanor, weary of grief, of duty, of this endless performance of normalcy when nothing feels normal anymore." We took our positions at the table, our hands resting on the velvet cloth, the candles casting our shadows large and strange against the walls. I began the ritual as I always did, calling out to the spirits, inviting them to make their presence known, my voice taking on that distant quality I had learned to cultivate. But something felt different that night, the air heavier, charged with an energy I did not recognize. Then Adrian spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Catherine, if you are here, if you can hear me, I need you to know something. I need you to know that I am trying to live again. I need your blessing to let you go." The candles flickered violently, all of them at once, and the temperature plummeted so suddenly I gasped. I felt something in the room with us, something that was not merely the product of suggestion or atmosphere, something real and cold and ancient. My skin prickled with gooseflesh, and I opened my mouth to speak, to end the session, because this felt wrong, dangerous in a way I could not articulate. But before I could utter a word, Adrian reached across the table and took both my hands in his grip warm and solid and achingly real. "Eleanor," he said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before, something raw and desperate. "I am falling in love with you. God help me. I know it is wrong. I know it is too soon. I know you are still in mourning and I have no right, but I cannot continue this pretense. I did not come here tonight for Catherine. I came here for you." The world seemed to stop, the air itself holding its breath. I stared at him across the candle flames, at this proud, lonely man who had just laid his heart before me, and I felt something inside me crack open, all the careful walls I had built around my own heart crumbling like paper in flame. "Adrian," I whispered, and his name on my lips felt like a prayer, like a confession. Then the candles went out, all of them, plunging us into absolute darkness, and the cold intensified until it burned, until I could see my breath misting in the blackness. I felt Adrian's hands tighten on mine, felt him stand, heard him call my name, but his voice sounded distant, muffled, as though he were speaking from very far away. "Eleanor," he called, and there was fear in his voice now, genuine fear. I tried to answer, tried to hold on to him, but his hands were slipping from mine, or mine from his, I could not tell. And then there was a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, like the world inhaling, and Adrian's grip was gone entirely. I lunged forward in the darkness, my hands grasping at nothing, and I screamed his name into the void. When Mrs. Hewitt burst in with a lamp a moment later, the parlor was empty save for me, kneeling on the floor beside the overturned table, Adrian's gloves still resting on the chair where he had left them, the candles scattered and cold. Adrian Harcourt had vanished as though he had never been there at all, leaving me alone with the impossible truth of what had just occurred, with the echo of his confession still ringing in my ears, with the terrible knowledge that I had loved him too, that I loved him still, and that I had lost him to the very forces I had spent 3 years claiming to command. The spirit world had taken him. I knew it with a certainty that went beyond reason, beyond doubt, and I did not know if it would ever give him back. The police came the following morning. 2 constables with skeptical faces and notebooks they barely bothered to open. They listened to my account with the weary patience of men accustomed to the hysterics of women, their eyes traveling over my parlor with poorly concealed disdain, taking in the velvet draping, the candles, the crystal ball I kept on the mantel, more for atmosphere than any practical use. One of them, a broad man with graying whiskers, asked if Lord Harcourt and I had been romantically involved, and the way he said it made the question an accusation. I told them the truth, or as much of it as I dared. Lord Harcourt had been a client. We had been conducting a séance. The candles had gone out. When the light returned, he was gone. I did not tell them about his confession, about the way he had held my hands, about the love I had seen in his eyes in those final moments. Some truths were too precious, too fragile, to be subjected to the scrutiny of men who had already decided I was either a fraud or a madwoman or both. They searched the house, of course, Mrs. Hewitt trailing behind them with increasing indignation, protesting the invasion even as she shot me worried glances that conveyed everything she could not say aloud. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Adrian had not hidden himself in a cupboard or slipped out through a window. He had simply vanished, pulled into some realm I could sense but not see, stolen by forces I had spent years pretending to understand, but had never truly believed in until that terrible moment. After they left, with stern warnings about wasting police time and dark mutterings about spiritualist charlatans, I sat alone in my parlor, Adrian's gloves still resting on the chair where he had placed them with such care. I picked them up, held them against my face, breathed in the scent of leather and the faint cologne he wore, something with notes of sandalwood and bergamot. The grief that crashed over me then was unlike anything I had felt, even when Thomas died. Because Thomas's death had been natural, comprehensible, the sad but inevitable conclusion to an illness we had both known would take him. This was different. This was violation, impossibility, a theft perpetrated by the very world I had claimed to commune with, and I had no idea how to fight forces I could not see or touch or reason with. But I had to try. The alternative, accepting that Adrian was simply gone, that I would never know what had happened to him, that his last words to me would remain forever unanswered, was unbearable. I thought of him trapped somewhere, cold and alone, calling out for help that would not come, and the image filled me with such desperation that I could scarcely breathe. I began by visiting every spiritualist, every medium, every practitioner of the occult arts I could find in London. I traveled to Whitechapel to consult a Hungarian woman who read tarot in a room that smelled of cabbage and cats. I paid $1 to a blind seer in Southwark who told me I carried death on my shoulders like a shawl. I attended séances in Mayfair drawing rooms where wealthy widows contacted husbands who told them where to invest their money, and gatherings in Clerkenwell basements where earnest young men debated the philosophical implications of ectoplasm. Most of them were charlatans like myself. I could see it immediately, the way they manipulated grief for profit, the tricks with hidden assistants and phosphorescent paint and mechanical contraptions designed to simulate spiritual phenomena. But a few, a very few, possessed something genuine, a sensitivity that went beyond performance. They felt it too, the presence of something vast and incomprehensible just beyond the veil of ordinary reality. Yet none of them could help me. None of them had ever heard of someone being taken as Adrian had been taken. The dead sometimes spoke to the living, they assured me. But the living did not vanish into the realm of the dead, not unless they died first. And if Adrian had died, where was his body? I returned home each night exhausted and despairing, my savings dwindling as I spent money I could not afford on consultations that yielded nothing. Mrs. Hewitt watched me with increasing concern, bringing me tea I did not drink and meals I could not eat, suggesting gently that perhaps I should accept what the police had already concluded, that Lord Harcourt had staged his own disappearance for reasons known only to himself, that he had used me and my reputation to create the illusion of something supernatural when the truth was far more mundane. But I knew better. I had felt what happened in that room. I had felt the cold, the presence, the terrible pull of something hungry and ancient. Adrian had not abandoned me. He had been stolen, and I would not rest until I found him again. 3 weeks after his disappearance, I returned to my parlor and prepared for a séance alone. I had not held a session since that night, had turned away the few clients who still dared approach me, their curiosity about the scandal outweighing their desire for spiritual comfort. But now I lit the candles myself, arranged them in the same positions they had occupied that evening, draped the table in burgundy velvet, and sat in the chair that had been Adrian's. I did not know what I was doing, not really. All my previous séances had been performance, carefully orchestrated theater designed to give grieving people what they desperately wanted to hear. But this was different. This time I was not performing for anyone. I was reaching out into the darkness with every particle of my being, calling not to some vague spirit realm, but to Adrian himself, wherever he was, whatever had become of him. Adrian, I whispered into the candlelit quiet. Adrian, if you can hear me, if any part of you remains in this world or touches it, please give me a sign. Tell me how to find you. Tell me you are still there. Nothing happened. The candles burned steady, the air remained merely cold rather than freezing, and I felt foolish suddenly, a widow talking to an empty room, a woman who had confused loneliness and attraction for love and was now paying the price for her presumption. What right did I have to mourn Adrian Harcourt? We had known each other mere weeks. He was a lord, and I was a woman of questionable profession. His confession might have been nothing more than the temporary madness of grief, words he would have regretted in daylight, a mistake he would have been relieved to escape. I stood to blow out the candles, to abandon this futile exercise, when I felt it. A touch, light as breath, against the back of my neck. I froze, my heart hammering, every instinct screaming that I was not alone. The touch came again, firmer this time, fingers trailing down my spine with an intimacy that made me gasp. I spun around, but there was nothing there, only shadows and candlelight, and the persistent sense of a presence I could feel but not see. Eleanor, a voice whispered, and it was Adrian's voice. I would have known it anywhere. But it sounded distant, distorted, as though he were speaking underwater or from the bottom of a very deep well. Adrian, I cried, my voice breaking. Where are you? How do I reach you? The candles flickered then, not violently as they had that night, but rhythmically, in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the furthest candle on my left went out entirely, and I understood somehow that this was direction, that Adrian was trying to guide me, to show me where to look. I followed the candles as they extinguished one by one, creating a path across my parlor, up the stairs, toward the small room at the back of the house that I had been using for storage, filled with Thomas's belongings that I had never been able to bring myself to sort or discard. The final candle I carried with me, its flame dancing wildly, though there was no draught, and when I pushed open the door to that neglected room, the flame burned blue, cold, and eerie, illuminating trunks and boxes and the dust of years. There, in the corner, half hidden beneath a stack of Thomas's old medical texts, I saw it. A wooden box I did not recognize, small and ornate, carved with symbols that made my eyes ache when I tried to focus on them. I set down the candle and lifted the box with trembling hands. It was heavier than it should have been for its size, and when I opened it, I found a single object resting on black velvet. A ring. A man's signet ring, gold and old, engraved with a crest I recognized as the Harcourt family seal. But it was not the ring itself that made me cry out and nearly drop the box. It was what lay beneath it, a piece of paper, folded once, written in handwriting I had seen dozens of times on the notes Adrian had sent requesting appointments. Eleanor, it read. If you are reading this, then I have failed to return, and you have been brave enough to look for me. I am here, in the space between, neither living nor dead, held by something I do not understand. It is so cold here, and I am so alone, but the thought of you gives me warmth. The thought of you keeps me from dissolving entirely into this gray nothing. I do not know if you felt what I felt, if my confession reached you before I was taken, but I must tell you now, in whatever way I can. I love you, Eleanor Ashford. I love you with a completeness that frightens me, that makes me understand for the first time what it means to truly live. If there is any way back to you, I will find it. Wait for me. Believe in me. Do not let them convince you I left willingly. I would never leave you, not of my own choice. Not ever. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. How had this box come to be in my house? How had Adrian written this letter from wherever he was trapped? Nothing made sense, and yet the evidence was here, solid and undeniable, proof that some part of Adrian could still reach across the divide, could still touch this world, could still speak to me. I clutched the ring to my chest, feeling its weight, its warmth against my palm, and I understood then what I had to do. If Adrian could reach me, then I could reach him. The connection between us was not severed, only stretched, thinned to near breaking, but still intact. I had been searching for answers from others, from practitioners who did not know Adrian, who had never felt the bond we shared. But the answer had been here all along, in the very house where he disappeared, in the love he had confessed, and the love I had not yet spoken aloud, but that burned in me like a flame that would not be extinguished. I would hold another séance, but this time I would not perform. This time I would open myself completely, without fear or artifice, without the protective distance I had always maintained. I would call to Adrian with everything I was, every hope and fear and desperate longing, and I would pull him back from whatever darkness held him, or I would follow him into it. Either way, we would be together. But I could not do it alone. I needed help, not from charlatans or skeptics, but from someone who knew what it meant to love without hope, to reach across impossible distances, to believe in things that could not be proven. I needed someone who had known Adrian, who had loved him too, who would have reason to want him returned. I thought of his sister, Catherine, the ghost I had pretended to channel all those weeks. What if she was real? What if she could help me? What if the key to bringing Adrian back lay not in the world of the living, but in enlisting the aid of the dead? The following evening, I prepared my parlor once more, but this time I included something new. I asked Mrs. Hewitt to bring me flowers, white roses, Catherine's favorite according to what Adrian had told me. I placed them on the table beside a photograph I had convinced Adrian to lend me weeks earlier, an image of Catherine at 16, laughing in a garden, her whole life ahead of her, her death still 6 years distant. I sat before her image, Adrian's ring on a chain around my neck, resting against my heart, and I spoke not as a medium performing for an audience, but as one woman to another, one soul to another. "Catherine," I said softly, "I know you are there. I know you watch over your brother. He loved you so much, loves you still, and he is lost now, trapped because of me. Because he came to find you and found me instead, because we dared to love each other in defiance of grief and propriety and all the rules that govern how the bereaved are supposed to behave. Help me, Catherine. Please, help me bring him home. The candles flickered, gentle this time, almost tender, and I felt a warmth spread through the room, soft and golden. Nothing like the terrible cold that had accompanied Adrian's disappearance. The scent of roses intensified, became almost overwhelming, and I knew, with a certainty beyond reason, that Catherine Harcourt was with me, that she had heard my plea, that she understood. A single white rose petal lifted from the arrangement and drifted across the table, coming to rest directly on Adrian's photograph. Then another, and another, until his image was covered in petals, a blessing or a promise, I could not tell which. I wept then, with relief and gratitude, and a hope so fierce it hurt. I was not alone in this anymore. Catherine was with me, and together we would find a way to bring Adrian back, from the gray nothing where he waited. Together we would prove that love was stronger than death, stronger than whatever forces had sought to keep us apart. I did not know yet how we would do it, what price would be required, what dangers we would face. But I knew with absolute certainty that I would pay any price, face any danger, risk anything and everything, because Adrian Harcourt was worth it. Because he had given me back my own heart, had made me feel alive again after 3 years of merely existing, and I would not abandon him to darkness. The seances began again, but they were different now. No longer performances, but genuine attempts at contact, at bridging the worlds. Catherine came to me night after night, her presence growing stronger, more distinct, and she showed me things, fragments of knowledge about the space where Adrian was trapped, about the entity that held him, about the ritual that would be required to bring him home. It would not be easy, she warned me, her voice like bells in my mind. It would demand sacrifice, courage, and faith absolute. But it could be done if I was willing, if I was strong enough, if my love for Adrian was as true and deep as I believed it to be. I am willing, I told her. I am strong enough. My love is true. Just tell me what I must do. The ritual Catherine described to me over the course of many nights was unlike anything I had encountered in my years of pretending to commune with the dead. It required no parlor tricks, no hidden assistance, no theatrical effects designed to convince skeptical observers. Instead, it demanded something far more difficult and infinitely more dangerous. It demanded that I willingly open myself to the spirit world, that I become a doorway through which Adrian could return, that I risk my own soul in the process. The boundary between life and death is not meant to be crossed, Catherine explained, her voice clearer now than it had been in our first communications, as though our continued contact was strengthening the connection between us. Adrian is trapped in the liminal space, the gray realm where spirits linger when they are not ready to move forward but cannot return to the living. Something pulled him there, something ancient and hungry that feeds on love and longing, on the intensity of human emotion. It will not release him easily. What is this entity? I asked, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. Why did it take him? Catherine's presence shimmered in the candlelight, and I could almost see her now, a pale figure in white, her face beautiful and sad. Because he was in love, she said simply. Because in that moment, when he confessed his feelings for you, his heart was open in a way it had not been since my death. The entity sensed his vulnerability, his desire, and it seized him. It collects souls this way, souls caught in the act of opening themselves to love after loss. It feeds on the poignancy of such moments, on the beauty and terror of choosing to live again after grief. Horror washed over me, cold and nauseating. So it was my fault, I whispered. If he had never come to me, if I had never allowed myself to care for him, if I had maintained proper distance, he would be safe. "No," Catherine said, and her voice was fierce. "Do not take that guilt upon yourself, Eleanor. Adrian chose to love you. He chose to open his heart knowing the risk, though he did not understand the nature of that risk. And you gave him something precious in return. You gave him hope, possibility, a reason to believe his life could hold joy again. The entity may have taken his body, but his soul remains his own because of you, because the love he feels for you anchors him to this world. Without that love, he would have been consumed entirely, dissolved into the gray nothing. Your love is what keeps him whole, what makes it possible to bring him back. I wanted to believe her, needed to believe her, but the weight of responsibility was crushing. What must I do? I asked. Tell me everything. I will do whatever is required. The ritual Catherine outlined was complex and precise, requiring specific timing, specific materials, and above all, absolute conviction. It could only be performed at the threshold between day and night, at dusk on the night of the new moon, when the boundary between worlds was thinnest. I would need objects that connected Adrian to both life and death. His signet ring, which I already possessed. A photograph of him among the living, something that had belonged to Catherine, to serve as her anchor to the proceedings, and my own blood, willingly given, to seal the doorway and provide a path for his return. The new moon was 10 days away, 10 days to prepare, to gather what I needed, to steel myself for what was to come. Catherine warned me that the entity would fight to keep Adrian, that it would attempt to confuse me, to frighten me, to make me doubt my own purpose. It might take Adrian's form and tell me lies. It might show me terrible things, visions designed to break my will. I would have to hold fast to what I knew was true, to the memory of Adrian's confession, to the love I felt for him, and I could not waver even for a moment. If I failed, if I lost my nerve or made a mistake in the ritual, the consequences would be dire. The doorway I opened might never close, allowing other entities to cross into our world. Or worse, I might be pulled through myself, trapped in the gray realm with Adrian, both of us lost forever. But if I succeeded, if I held strong and completed the ritual correctly, Adrian would return to me, whole and alive, and the entity would be forced to release its claim on him. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Catherine asked me on the night before the ritual, her presence soft and sorrowful in the darkness. "It is not too late to turn back, to accept what has happened and mourn my brother as I have been mourned. You have your whole life ahead of you, Eleanor. You could find love again with someone safer, someone who does not carry the weight of tragedy and supernatural forces. You could be happy." I thought about it, truly considered what she was offering me. A life without Adrian, but a life nonetheless, perhaps even a good life in time, once the grief faded to manageable proportions. I could close up my parlor, move to another part of the city, find work that did not require me to exploit the bereaved. I could try to be the person I had been before Thomas died, before widowhood and desperation had turned me into someone who trafficked in false comfort. But even as I contemplated it, I knew I could not choose that path. Not because I was brave or noble or particularly strong, but because a life without Adrian, knowing he was trapped and suffering while I went about the business of living, was no life at all. I would be haunted forever by the what-ifs, by the knowledge that I had been too afraid to fight for him, too concerned with my own safety to risk everything for the man I loved. "I am certain," I told Catherine. "Whatever happens, whatever the cost, I must try. If I fail, at least I will have failed in the attempt to save him. If I do nothing, I fail him anyway, and I fail myself as well." "Very well," Catherine said, and I heard approval in her voice, and sadness too. "Then let us begin preparations. There is much to do and little time remaining." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Mrs. Hewitt, who had remained loyal to me despite the scandal and the strange occurrences that had driven away my other clients, helped me gather what I needed. She asked no questions, This dear woman who had become more than a landlady, more than a servant, something approaching the sister I had never had. She sensed, I think, that I was engaged in something momentous, something that might either save me or destroy me, and she had chosen to stand beside me regardless. We traveled to the Harcourt London townhouse, now shuttered and empty in Adrian's absence, the servants dismissed, the rooms covered in Holland cloth. I had kept the key Adrian had given me weeks earlier when he had offered to lend me books from his library, back when we had both been pretending our relationship was merely that of medium and client. Using that key felt like both a betrayal and a homecoming, stepping into his private space without permission, but also entering a place where his presence was everywhere, in the choice of furniture, the books on the shelves, the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered in the air. I found what I needed in Catherine's old room, a space Adrian had kept exactly as it had been the day she died, a shrine to his grief and love for her. Her hairbrush still rested on the vanity, strands of her auburn hair caught in the bristles. I took it with trembling hands, whispering an apology to the empty room, explaining what I intended, asking her forgiveness for disturbing these precious relics. "You need not apologize," Catherine's voice came to me, warm and reassuring even in that sad space. "I want you to use whatever of mine might help. I want my brother back in the world, Eleanor. I want him to have the chance at happiness that I was denied. Take what you need with my blessing." I also took a photograph from Adrian's study, a formal portrait showing him in his youth, perhaps 18 or 19, before grief had carved lines into his face, before responsibility had bowed his shoulders. He looked so vital in that image, so full of possibility, and I wondered if that was the Adrian who would return to me, or if the man who came back would be changed irrevocably by what he had endured. The final component was the most difficult. My own blood, Catherine had said, willingly given as an act of sacrifice and devotion. On the morning of the ritual, I sat before my mirror and used a small knife to open a shallow cut across my left palm, catching the blood in a crystal vial that had once held perfume. The pain was sharp and immediate, grounding me in physical reality, even as I prepared to step beyond it. I watched the red liquid fill the vial, the essence of my life, my devotion, my desperate hope, and I felt no fear, only determination. As dusk approached on the night of the new moon, I prepared my parlor one final time. I removed all the theatrical trappings I had accumulated over the years, the velvet draping, the crystal ball, the props and tricks that had defined my professional life. I wanted nothing false in the space tonight, nothing that might confuse or dilute the genuine power I was attempting to invoke. I arranged the candles in a circle, placed Adrian's ring and photograph at the center, set Catherine's hairbrush beside them, positioned the vial of my blood at the northern point where tradition held the doorway between worlds was thinnest. Mrs. Hewitt came to the parlor door as I was finishing my preparations, her face creased with worry. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Ashford?" she asked, reverting to formality in her distress. "What you are attempting tonight, it is not natural. It is not safe." "I know," I told her gently. "But love is rarely safe, and some things are worth any risk. If I do not return by morning, there are instructions in my desk drawer. My affairs are in order. You have been a true friend to me, Mrs. Hewitt, and I am grateful." She embraced me then, this practical woman who had seen me through widowhood and poverty and scandal, and I felt her shoulders shake with silent tears. "You come back," she whispered fiercely. "You bring him back, and you both come home. You hear me?" "I will try," I promised, though I could not know if it was a promise I could keep. When she left, closing the door softly behind her, I entered the circle of candles and lit them one by one, speaking Catherine's name with each flame, invoking her presence, her protection, her guidance. The room grew cold as the last candle caught, and I felt her arrive, felt the space fill with her gentle, sorrowful energy. "I am here," she said. "Are you ready, Eleanor?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and lifted the vial of my blood. I am ready. Following Catherine's instructions precisely, I anointed each candle with a drop of blood, speaking words she taught me. Words in a language I did not recognize, but that felt ancient on my tongue, heavy with power and intention. Then I took Adrian's ring and slipped it onto my own finger, too large for me, hanging loose, but I curled my hand into a fist to hold it in place. I lifted his photograph, pressed it against my heart, and spoke directly to him, to wherever he was trapped in that gray nothing. Adrian, I called, my voice strong and clear. Adrian Harcourt, I am here. I am calling you home. Follow my voice. Follow the connection between us. Follow the love that binds us together. I am opening the way. Come back to me. Come back to the light. The candles flickered, and the cold intensified until frost formed on the windows, until my breath came in white clouds, until my fingers began to lose feeling. The room darkened despite the candle flames, shadows pooling in the corners, and I felt something gathering, something vast and terrible, drawn by the power I was invoking. Then I saw him. Adrian, standing at the edge of the candlelight, his form translucent, wavering like smoke, his face gaunt and exhausted, but unmistakably his. He reached toward me, his mouth forming my name, though no sound emerged, and I lunged forward, breaking the circle, reaching for him with both hands. The moment I crossed that boundary of candles, the world inverted. I was no longer in my parlor, but in the gray realm Catherine had described, a place without color or warmth or any sense of dimension, where up and down held no meaning, where time seemed to flow in all directions at once. Adrian was there, more solid now, and he caught me as I stumbled, his arms coming around me, his body achingly real against mine. "Eleanor," he gasped, and his voice was rough from disuse, from screaming into the void. "Oh God, Eleanor, you should not have come here. It is not safe. You must go back." "Not without you," I said, gripping his coat with desperate strength. "Never without you. I came to bring you home." Around us, the gray nothing began to shift and coil, taking on forms that hurt to perceive, angles that should not exist, appendages that were not quite tentacles and not quite claws. The entity was manifesting, drawn by our reunion, hungry for the emotion we were generating, and I understood, with sudden, terrible clarity, that Catherine had been right. This thing fed on love, on longing, on the exquisite pain of souls reaching for each other across impossible distances. "You cannot have him," I shouted into that formless vastness. "He is mine, and I am his, and love is stronger than your hunger. Release him. Release us both." The entity laughed, if such a word could describe the sound it made, something between wind and breaking glass and the distant screams of the damned. "Love makes you vulnerable," it said, speaking directly into my mind, its voice cold and amused. "Love makes you weak. Your devotion to him will be your undoing, little medium. You will stay here with him forever, trapped in my collection of perfect moments, suspended eternally in the instant before fulfillment, always reaching and never touching, always longing and never satisfied." I felt its power pressing against me, trying to separate me from Adrian, to tear us apart and freeze us individually in this gray hell, and I knew I was not strong enough to fight it alone. But I was not alone. Catherine was with me. I could feel her presence even here, her love for her brother shining like a beacon in the darkness, and I had prepared for this moment, had brought what was needed to seal the ritual and force the doorway closed. I pulled the vial from where I had secured it inside my bodice, unstoppered it with shaking fingers, and spoke the final words Catherine had taught me. "By blood willingly given, by love freely offered, by sacrifice gladly made, I bind this doorway and command you to release what you have stolen. Adrian Harcourt belongs to the living world, to me, and I claim him now and forever." I poured the blood onto the gray nothing beneath my feet, and where it touched, color bloomed, vivid and shocking after the monochrome bleakness, spreading outward in ripples of crimson and gold, burning away the gray like sunlight through fog. The entity screamed, recoiling, and I felt its grip on Adrian weaken, felt the boundary between worlds thinning, felt something pulling us back toward life and warmth and reality. "Hold on to me," I screamed to Adrian, and he did, his arms crushing me against him as the gray realm collapsed around us, as the entity shrieked in rage and loss, as Catherine's presence wrapped around us both like wings, protecting us, guiding us, pushing us through the narrowing doorway between death and life. Then we were falling, tumbling through darkness and cold and a roaring that filled my ears and drowned out all thought. And I held Adrian, and he held me, and I prayed with every particle of my being that we would land somewhere safe, somewhere real, somewhere that would let us finally be together as we were meant to be. We landed hard on the floor of my parlor, tangled together, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thick, too warm, almost overwhelming after the thin emptiness of the gray realm. For a long moment I could not move, could not think, could only lie there with Adrian's weight half across me, his heart hammering against my ribs, his breath hot against my neck, proof that he was real, that he was alive, that we had both survived. "Eleanor," he whispered, and his voice cracked on my name, raw with emotion. "Eleanor, my God, what have you done? What have you risked for me?" I found the strength to lift my hand, to touch his face, to feel the stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin, the tears that were streaming down his cheeks and mixing with my own. Everything, I told him. I risked everything, and I would do it again. I would do it 1,000 times. I love you, Adrian, I love you, and I could not let you go. He made a sound between a laugh and a sob. And then his mouth was on mine, desperate and grateful and tender all at once, a kiss that tasted of salt and longing and the sheer overwhelming relief of being alive, of being together, of having defied forces that had tried to keep us apart. I kissed him back with everything I had, pouring into it all the fear and hope and love I had carried through those terrible weeks, and for a moment the world contracted to just the two of us, just this connection, this proof that we had won. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, I became aware that we were not alone. Mrs. Hewitt stood in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Behind her, barely visible in the candlelight, I could sense Catherine's presence, warm and approving, like a benediction. "Mrs. Hewitt," I said, my voice hoarse, "this is Lord Harcourt. He has returned." She nodded slowly, taking in the scene before her, with the practical assessment of a woman who had seen much in her life and learned to accept what could not be explained. "I will bring tea," she said finally, "and perhaps something stronger. You both look as though you have traveled very far." After she left, I helped Adrian to sit up, noting with concern how pale he was, how his hands shook, how he seemed almost insubstantial in the candlelight, as though the gray realm had not entirely released its claim on him. He caught me looking and managed a weak smile. "I am well enough," he said, "or I will be, given time. Eleanor, what I experienced there, in that place, I cannot begin to describe it. The emptiness, the cold, the sense of being suspended in nothingness with no way forward and no way back. If not for the thought of you, the memory of your face, your voice, I think I would have lost myself entirely. You were my anchor, my light in that darkness. You kept me whole." I took his hand, felt how cold his fingers still were, and chafed them between my own. "You do not need to speak of it now. You are home. You are safe. That is all that matters." But he shook his head, his expression troubled. "There is something I must tell you, something I learned while I was trapped there. The entity, Eleanor, it showed me things, visions of what it had done to others who had been taken as I was taken. there were so many of them. Souls caught in moments of opening themselves to love after loss, frozen forever in their longing. I saw a young widow who had dared to smile at another man. I saw a widower who had begun to imagine a future beyond grief. I saw lovers torn apart by death who had tried to find comfort in new arms, all of them punished for the crime of choosing to live again, to love again. Horror crawled up my spine. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would such an entity exist? What purpose could such cruelty serve?" Adrian's grip on my hand tightened. "I do not know if it has purpose in any sense we would understand. I think it is simply hunger, endless and insatiable, feeding on the poignancy of such moments because they are when human souls burn brightest, when emotion is most intense and beautiful and painful. It collects us like a miser hoards gold, admiring the beauty of what it has stolen while feeling none of it itself." "Then we must warn others," I said urgently. "We must find a way to protect those who are vulnerable, to prevent it from taking more victims." But even as I spoke, I saw the impossibility of it. How could we explain what had happened? Who would believe us? The police already thought I was either a charlatan or unhinged. Society would dismiss us as madmen if we spoke of entities that fed on love and gray realms between life and death. We would be locked away in asylums, separated forever, and the entity would continue its harvest unimpeded. Catherine's presence grew stronger then, and I heard her voice clearly in my mind, gentle but firm. "There is a way," she said. "The ritual you performed, Eleanor, the doorway you opened and sealed with your blood, it did more than simply retrieve my brother. It created a protection around you both, a ward that will prevent the entity from approaching either of you again. And I can extend that protection to others, if you are willing to help me." "How?" I asked aloud, causing Adrian to look at me with sudden understanding in his eyes. "You hear her," he said, "not a question, but a statement of fact. She is here, is she not?" "My sister." "Yes," I told him softly. "She has been helping me from the beginning. She is the reason I knew how to bring you back." Adrian's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Catherine," he whispered to the empty air. "Oh, Catherine, I have missed you so terribly. I am so sorry I could not save you. You were never meant to save me." Catherine's voice came again, and I sensed that Adrian could hear her now too, that the veil between worlds had thinned enough in my parlor that she could speak to us both. "My death was an accident, a tragedy, but not your fault. You have carried guilt for it far too long, dear brother. It is time to let me go, to let yourself be happy, to build a life with this woman who loves you enough to walk into death itself to retrieve you." Adrian bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and I held him while he grieved properly for the first time, while he released the burden he had carried since Catherine's death, while he accepted that his sister's spirit was at peace and that she wanted him to be at peace as well. When the storm of emotion had passed, Catherine spoke again, her voice taking on a tone of gentle instruction. "I can remain in the liminal spaces," she said, watching for others who are vulnerable to the entity's hunger. "When I sense someone opening themselves to love after loss, someone whose heart is bright enough to attract its attention, I can guide them, protect them, teach them to shield themselves as Eleanor has shielded you. But I will need help from this side, from the living world. I will need you both to be my voice, my hands, my presence among those who cannot see or hear me. You want us to help protect others," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "To identify those at risk and guide them before the entity can strike." "Yes," Catherine confirmed. "Eleanor, you have a gift, a genuine sensitivity to the spirit world that goes far beyond anything you realized. You felt the entity's presence the night it took Adrian. You sensed the doorway between worlds. You have the ability to perceive threats that others cannot see. And Adrian, you have experienced the gray realm and survived it. You understand what is at stake in a way few living souls could. Together, you could save countless people from the fate you both escaped. It seemed an impossible task, overwhelming in its scope. But as I looked at Adrian and saw the determination hardening in his expression, I felt something shift inside me. For years I had been using my supposed gifts to exploit the grieving, taking money from people whose pain I claimed to alleviate but never truly could. This was different. This was real. This was meaningful. This was a way to transform something terrible into something that might actually help people, that might prevent others from suffering as Adrian had suffered. As I had suffered in those weeks, I thought him lost forever. "We will do it," I said firmly. "We will find a way to warn others, to protect them, to be the shield between the vulnerable and the predatory forces that hunt them." Adrian lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "But first," he said quietly, "we must attend to something else. Something that was interrupted the night I was taken. Eleanor Ashford, before I was stolen from you, I confessed that I was falling in love with you. That confession has only deepened in the time since. I love you completely and irrevocably. I love your courage and your compassion and your stubborn refusal to accept defeat. I love the way you speak to spirits and the living with the same gentle respect. I love that you risked everything to save a man you had known only weeks, that you walked into the place between worlds without knowing if you would return." He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small box, its velvet surface worn but intact, miraculously preserved through his ordeal in the gray realm. When he opened it, I saw a ring inside, delicate and beautiful, a sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the candlelight and threw it back in sparks of blue fire. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She gave it to me before she died, and told me to offer it only to a woman I loved with my whole heart, a woman who would be my equal and my partner in all things. I brought it with me the night I intended to propose, the night I vanished. I have carried it with me through darkness and emptiness and despair, and it became my talisman, my reminder of what awaited me if I could only find my way back. Eleanor, I am asking you now what I tried to ask you then. Will you marry me? Will you bind your life to mine, knowing the dangers we face, the strangeness of what we have experienced, the responsibilities we are undertaking? Will you love me as I love you until death and beyond it?" My vision blurred with tears, but I blinked them back because I wanted to see his face clearly when I answered, wanted to witness the moment his expression transformed from anxious hope to radiant joy. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. I will love you until death and beyond it. I will stand beside you as we do this work Catherine has asked of us. I will be your equal and your partner in all things, for as long as we both shall live." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for me, as though everything that had happened had been leading to this moment. Then he pulled me into his arms and kissed me again, and this kiss was different from the first, less desperate and more certain, a promise rather than a relief, a beginning rather than an ending. Catherine's presence surrounded us both, and I felt her joy as clearly as I felt my own, felt her blessing on our union, felt her satisfaction that her brother had found happiness at last. "Thank you," I whispered to her. "Thank you for helping me save him. Thank you for trusting me with him." "You saved each other," she replied, her voice already beginning to fade as she prepared to return to whatever realm she inhabited when not actively manifesting in ours. "Love saved you both, and now that love will save others. I am proud of you, Eleanor. I am proud to call you sister." Then she was gone, but the warmth of her presence lingered, and I knew she would never be far, that she would watch over us as we began this new phase of our lives together, as we learned to identify and protect the vulnerable, as we built a life that honored both the living and the dead. Mrs. Hewitt returned with tea and brandy, took one look at us wrapped in each other's arms, at the ring glinting on my finger, and smiled through her own tears. "Well," she said briskly, setting down the tray with a decisive click. "I suppose I should start planning a wedding then, though I suspect it will be unlike any wedding this neighborhood has ever seen." Adrian laughed, a sound of pure delight that transformed his face, erasing years of grief and care, revealing the man he had been before tragedy had marked him. "You are not wrong, Mrs. Hewitt," he said. "Nothing about our courtship has been conventional. I see no reason our wedding should be either." Over tea and brandy, as the candles burned low and the night deepened around us, we began to plan our future. Adrian's townhouse would become our base of operations, its library converted into a research space where we could study occult texts and historical accounts of similar entities. My parlor would remain as it was, a place where I could continue to hold genuine seances, but now with the goal of helping spirits find peace and protecting the living from supernatural threats. "We would marry quietly," Adrian said, as soon as the banns could be read, "with only Mrs. Hewitt and perhaps a few of his most trusted servants as witnesses. Society would gossip, of course, about the missing lord who reappeared to marry a medium of dubious reputation. But we had both moved beyond caring what society thought. We had looked into the void and returned. The opinions of narrow-minded gossips seemed laughably insignificant in comparison. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Adrian finally stood, swaying slightly with exhaustion, and I rose to steady him. "I should return to my house," he said reluctantly. "There will be questions, concerns about where I have been these past weeks. I must concoct some story, some explanation that will satisfy the authorities and prevent them from interfering with our plans." "Tell them you had a breakdown after your sister's death," I suggested. "That you wandered away in a fugue state, unable to remember who you were or where you belonged. Tell them you were taken in by a charitable family in the countryside who cared for you until your memory returned. It is close enough to the truth to be believable, and it explains your absence without inviting too many questions." He nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear with infinite tenderness. "You are brilliant as well as brave," he said. "Very well. I will play the part of the traumatized nobleman recovered from temporary madness. And once the scandal has died down, once we are married and established together, we will begin our true work." He kissed me once more at the door, a kiss that promised countless others to come, a lifetime of kisses. And then he was gone, stepping out into the gray London dawn, his shoulders straight, his step sure, a man who had returned from death with purpose and love and hope renewed. I stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared around the corner, then turned back to my parlor where the candles had finally guttered out, where the morning light was beginning to illuminate the ordinary reality of furniture and walls and the debris of our ritual scattered across the floor. It looked like the scene of some arcane ceremony, which I supposed it was, the place where love had proved stronger than death, where two worlds had touched and parted, where everything had changed. Mrs. Hewitt appeared beside me, slipping an arm around my waist in a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable in our former relationship of landlady and tenant, but was perfectly natural now in our new roles as family. "You did well," she said quietly. "You brought him home. Now rest before you collapse. There will be time enough later to face what comes next." She guided me upstairs to my room, helped me out of my dress, tucked me into bed as though I were a child, and I let her, too exhausted to protest, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened to do anything but surrender to sleep. My last thought before unconsciousness claimed me was of Adrian's face when I said yes, the joy and relief and love I had seen there, and I smiled as I drifted off, the sapphire ring heavy on my finger, a tangible reminder that I had not dreamed any of it, that the impossible had truly occurred. We had defied death itself, and we had won. Our wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small chapel on Adrian's country estate, a place Catherine had loved. where wildflowers grew between the ancient gravestones and morning light streamed through stained glass windows, depicting scenes of resurrection and redemption. The irony was not lost on either of us, marrying in a place dedicated to themes of returning from death, of finding new life after loss. But it felt appropriate somehow, an acknowledgement of the journey we had taken to reach this moment. Mrs. Hewitt stood as my witness, dressed in her finest black silk, tears streaming openly down her face throughout the brief ceremony. Adrian's butler, a dignified man named Harrison, who had served the Harcourt family for 40 years, stood as his witness, his expression carefully neutral, though I caught him smiling when he thought no one was watching. The vicar, an elderly man with kind eyes who had known Adrian since childhood, spoke the words that bound us together with a solemnity that suggested he understood this was no ordinary union, that something profound had brought us to this altar. When Adrian slipped a second ring onto my finger, a simple gold band to accompany his mother's sapphire, his hands were steady, his voice clear and strong as he made his vows. "I promise to love you in this life, and whatever may come after," he said, departing from the traditional words. "I promise to stand beside you against forces seen and unseen. I promise to honor the gift you have given me, the gift of a second chance, and to use that gift in service of others who suffer as we have suffered." My own vows were equally unconventional. "I promise to be your anchor in darkness," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I promise to walk beside you through whatever realms we must traverse. I promise to love you with the same courage you showed in returning to me, with the same devotion Catherine showed in helping us find each other. I promise to build with you a life that honors both the living and the dead, that recognizes love as the most powerful force in any world." When the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, when Adrian kissed me there in that chapel filled with centuries of prayers and hopes and griefs, I felt Catherine's presence wash over us both, felt her joy and blessing, and I knew she was truly at peace now, knowing her brother was no longer alone, no longer trapped in grief and guilt and loneliness. The wedding breakfast was simple, just the four of us in the Manor's dining room, but it was perfect, filled with laughter and stories, and the gentle beginning of building a family from the fragments of loss we had each carried. Mrs. Hewitt regaled Harrison with tales of my early days as a medium, the disasters and near misses I had survived, while Adrian held my hand beneath the table and traced circles on my palm with his thumb, a constant reminder of his presence, his reality, his love. That night, in the master bedroom that had been closed since Adrian's mother died, we lay together in the candlelight and spoke of the work ahead of us. Adrian had spent the past weeks cataloging the contents of his library, identifying texts that might help us understand the entity that had taken him and others like it that might prey on the vulnerable. He had found references in obscure grimoires, in accounts written by medieval mystics, in the journals of spiritualists who had died under mysterious circumstances. There was a pattern, he explained, a thread running through history of people who had been taken after opening themselves to love following loss, and always they vanished without explanation, leaving behind only the sense that something impossible had occurred. "We can help them," he said, his arm around me, my head resting on his chest, where I could hear the steady beating of his heart. "We can learn to identify the signs, to recognize when someone is vulnerable, to teach them to protect themselves before the entity strikes. Catherine can guide us from the spirit realm, warn us when she senses danger, and together we can create a network of protection, a web of awareness that spans both worlds." I thought of all the people I had failed over the years, the grieving clients I had deceived with false comfort and empty promises, and I felt something shift inside me, the guilt transforming into purpose. This was my redemption, the opportunity to use my genuine gifts in service of real protection, real healing, real good. I would no longer be a fraud preying on the desperate. I would be something far more valuable, a guardian standing between the living and the forces that sought to exploit their pain. Over the months that followed, we established ourselves in London dividing our time between Adrian's townhouse and my modest rooms in Bloomsbury, which we maintained as a place where people of limited means could come for help without feeling intimidated by aristocratic surroundings. Word spread slowly, carried by those we helped, whispered recommendations passing between widows and widowers, between the bereaved and the lost, between those who sensed there was something more to their grief than ordinary sorrow. They came to us with stories of strange occurrences, of cold spots and flickering candles, and the sense of being watched by something hungry and patient. We taught them to recognize the signs, to build mental shields, to understand that choosing to love again after loss was not betrayal, but courage, and that they need not feel guilty for wanting to live fully once more. Some we helped directly, performing rituals of protection similar to the one that had saved Adrian. Others we simply counseled, offering the comfort of knowing they were not alone, that what they experienced was real and could be defended against. Catherine was with us always, her presence a constant warmth in my awareness, guiding me to those most in need, warning me when the entity drew near, helping me understand the nuances of the spirit world in ways I had never imagined possible. Through her, I learned that the boundary between life and death was more permeable than I had realized, that love truly did transcend that boundary, and that those who had passed beyond could still touch the lives of those they had left behind, still offer comfort and protection and guidance. On the anniversary of Adrian's disappearance and return, we held a private ceremony in my parlor, now restored to something approaching normalcy, but still retaining the air of a sacred space where miracles had occurred. We lit candles for Catherine, for Thomas, for all the souls we had helped over the past year, and for those still suffering the predations of entities like the one that had tried to keep Adrian from me. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked Adrian as we sat together in the candlelight, his arm around me, my head on his shoulder. "Do you ever wish you had chosen a simpler life? A more conventional wife, a path that did not require you to remember and relive what you endured in the gray realm?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I felt him considering the question seriously, not dismissing it with easy reassurance, but truly examining what I was asking. "Never," he said finally, his voice low and certain. "What I experienced was terrible, Eleanor. I will not pretend otherwise. But it led me to you, to this life we have built, to purpose and meaning I never imagined possible. I was dying before I met you, not physically but spiritually, slowly suffocating under the weight of grief and duty and loneliness. You brought me back to life even before you brought me back from death. You gave me reasons to hope, to fight, to believe that joy was still possible. I would endure that gray realm 1,000 times if it meant finding my way to you." Tears spilled down my cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. The kind that washed away the last remnants of doubt and fear and guilt I had carried. I loved him so completely in that moment. This man who had seen the worst the universe could offer and had chosen nevertheless to love, to hope, to dedicate himself to protecting others from similar fates. He was everything I had not known I needed, everything I had not dared to want, and he was mine, bound to me by vows and by trials and by a love that had literally conquered death. The work was not easy. There were failures, people we could not reach in time, souls taken by the entity despite our best efforts, and each loss cut deep, reminded us of the stakes, of the relentless hunger we were fighting against. But there were victories too, lives saved, loves preserved, people who went on to build happy futures because we had warned them, protected them, given them the tools to shield themselves from predatory forces. One evening, nearly 2 years after our wedding, I sat in Adrian's study while he worked on cataloging a new acquisition of occult texts, my hand resting on my swollen belly where our child moved and kicked with increasing vigor. We had been surprised to discover I was pregnant, had not dared to hope that such ordinary happiness could be ours alongside the extraordinary work we did. But Catherine had laughed with delight when I told her, had assured me that the baby would be healthy and strong and protected, that no entity would dare approach a child born of love that had defied death itself. What will we tell her? I asked Adrian, for Catherine had informed me the child would be a girl. What will we say when she is old enough to ask how we met, how we came to do this work? Adrian looked up from his books, his face softening as it always did when he looked at me, even more so now that I carried his child. We will tell her the truth, he said simply. We will tell her that love is the most powerful force in any realm, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it, that death is not the end of connection, but merely a transformation of it. We will tell her that her mother walked into darkness to save her father, and that her Aunt Catherine watches over her from the world beyond, and that she comes from a line of people who understood that some things are worth any risk, any sacrifice, any cost. And if she inherits my gifts, I asked quietly, if she too can see and hear what others cannot? Then we will teach her to use those gifts wisely and well, Adrian said, coming to kneel beside my chair, his hands covering mine where they rested on our daughter's future home. We will teach her to protect herself and others. We will raise her to understand that gifts carry responsibilities, and that the greatest responsibility is always to love, to choose compassion over fear, to build bridges between worlds rather than walls. I bent to kiss him, this man who had become everything to me, and I felt our daughter move between us, a life created from love that had survived impossible trials, a promise that the future held hope as well as challenges, joy as well as duty. Catherine's presence wrapped around us all, and I heard her voice one final time before she faded back into whatever realm she inhabited, leaving us to our ordinary, extraordinary life. You have done well, little sister, she said, and there was pride in her voice, and love, and the particular satisfaction of one who has completed a great work. My brother is happy. You are both doing good in the world. Your daughter will be remarkable. I can ask for nothing more. I am at last completely at peace. Then she was gone, not vanished, but transformed, her presence no longer a distinct entity, but rather a warmth that suffused our lives, a protection that surrounded our home, a blessing that would extend to our daughter and, in time, to her children, a legacy of love that transcended death because two people had been brave enough to fight for each other when all reason said they should surrender. Adrian helped me to my feet, and we stood together at the window, looking out at the London evening, at the gaslights flickering to life in the gathering dusk, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that they were protected by forces they could not see, by guardians who stood watch in the liminal spaces, by love that had proved itself stronger than darkness. We had been tested in ways few people ever experienced, had looked into the void and refused to blink, had loved each other enough to risk everything, and we had won. Not completely, not permanently, for the entity still existed and always would, patient and hungry and waiting for moments of vulnerability. But we had won our own battle, had claimed our right to happiness, had built a life that honored both the living and the dead, and that was enough. That was everything. I leaned against my husband, felt his arms come around me and our daughter both, and I thought of the woman I had been before Adrian walked into my parlor, the widow running seances to survive, the fraud who had not believed in her own gifts, the lonely soul who had thought herself condemned to a half-life of memories and pretense. That woman was gone, transformed by love and courage and the refusal to accept defeat, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone purposeful, someone who had learned that the greatest magic was not in spirits or rituals or supernatural forces, but in the human heart's capacity to love beyond reason, beyond fear, beyond even death itself. The candles in the study flickered once, twice, 3 times, Catherine's signature farewell, and then burned steady and bright, and I smiled, knowing she was smiling too, wherever she was, satisfied that her brother had finally found the happiness he deserved, that I had found mine, that we had found it together in the most impossible and wonderful way imaginable. In the distance, church bells rang the hour, marking the passage of time in the world of the living, and somewhere in the realm beyond, I knew other bells were ringing too, marking our victory, our love, our refusal to be parted by forces that thought themselves stronger than the human spirit. They had been wrong, those forces. They would always be wrong. Because love, true love, the kind that looks into darkness and does not flinch, the kind that crosses between worlds to retrieve what has been stolen, the kind that builds futures from fragments of loss and hope. That kind of love could not be defeated, could not be contained, could not be diminished by anything the universe might throw against it. We had proved that, Adrian and I, and we would go on proving it every day for the rest of our lives, teaching others what we had learned, protecting the vulnerable, standing guard at the boundary between worlds, living fully and loving completely, and never, ever taking for granted the miracle of having found each other. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, covering London in white, muffling sound, transforming the familiar into something magical and strange. Adrian moved to add coal to the fire, and I settled into my chair with a book, and our daughter kicked and turned inside me, impatient to be born into this world we had made safe for her, this life we had fought to build, this love we had proved was stronger than anything, even death itself. And in the candlelight and firelight and the soft white glow of snow falling beyond the windows, we were simply a family, ordinary and extraordinary at once, blessed and tested and triumphant, together against whatever might come, forever bound by vows spoken in a chapel and promises forged in realms beyond comprehension. Husband and wife, and the child we had created from love that had conquered the impossible. This was our happy ending, hard-won and precious, and it was more than enough. It was everything we had dared to dream, and more than we had thought possible, and we would cherish it and protect it and live within it with gratitude and wonder and fierce, unending joy for all the years we were granted. The story that had begun with a disappearance and a desperate journey into darkness ended here in light and warmth and love and the promise of new life, proof that even the darkest trials could lead to the brightest happiness, that even the deepest griefs could be transformed into profound joy, that love truly was and would always be the most powerful force in any world, living or dead, seen or unseen, known or unknowable. We had learned that truth in the hardest way possible, and we would carry it with us always, a light to guide us through whatever shadows might still lie ahead, a certainty that no darkness could ever extinguish, a testament to the power of two hearts that refused to be parted, no matter what forces tried to tear them apart. This was our victory. This was our love. This was our life, won through courage and sacrifice and unwavering devotion, and we would live it fully, gratefully, joyfully, together until the very end. And perhaps, if Catherine was right about the nature of love and death and the connections that transcended both, together even beyond that end, into whatever lay waiting in the realms we had glimpsed but not yet fully explored. But that was a consideration for another day. For now, there was only this moment, this warmth, this love, this perfect, ordinary, extraordinary evening in the life we had built together. And it was more than enough. It was everything.